and good evening and welcome to this week's Maternity and Midwifery Hour. And it's the 13th episode of the 7th series. Now that's unlucky for some, but not for you, because this is going to be a fantastic session. You're going to really enjoy it. I know it is the last of the series, but we will be back in September. We're just taking a little break. Now, my name's Sue Macdonald, and I'm the curator for this Maternity and Midwifery Hour and also the Maternity and Midwifery Festivals. And I'm the happy chair for this evening's session. And I'm joined by Helen Elliott-Mainwaring, and I hope I've said that correctly, and
Sure.
Charlotte Phillips. And I'm just because we always do this to our guests, I'm going to ask them to share their moment of the week with us. So shall we start with Helen?
Oh, okay. My moment of the week is the rain, because we grow so much of our own fruit and veg. I'm just so glad it rained last night.
It was a lovely moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was.
Even though it's slightly warm. And how about Charlotte?
Oh, mine was, I've got 2 young boys and I picked them up at the end of the summer term for what was the end of a normal term. And it was delightful. It was lovely. I think they're both in their early school years. It's the first normal end of term we've had, and very grateful for it. Yeah.
Gosh. After all the last couple of years, it's those things that we used to take for granted that are so special now.
Absolutely.
It's really fantastic. So thank you for sharing that. The rain, well, I'm sure we're going to have more of that. So that's lovely. Thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, well, just a little bit, just to remind you where the Maternity and Midwifery Hour came from. We were born with the pandemic, and we were away. We designed it as a way of keeping midwives in touch with each other, and also student midwives, people who wanted to become student midwives, maternity care support workers, mums. And I'm also aware we've got quite a few medics with us, so hello to you, and quite a lot of people from all over the world. So welcome wherever you are to this evening. Now, you do know this is looked after by Matflix, and because it's looked after by Matflix, everything's curated and archived, so you can search for lots of things. If you're doing a project, and our 2 guests this evening might share their routes of gathering up data and literature. We've got a huge back catalogue, loads of really fantastic stuff, fantastic speakers, and it's really good to be able to access those. You can access the box sets, and there's a small fee for those, but you can access anything for free if you just want to dig through and find things. The only trouble with this, and I would speak from personal experiences, I probably get lost after a couple of times because I get interested and go off on a tangent on something. So it depends what sort of, route you're going, but it's great fun. And you can share with your colleagues, and please do share, because we love that. Okay, big thing. Guess what? It's been really hot. It's been hot the last couple of days. And I know it's quite interesting. I noticed on Twitter, there was a little plea from the nursing staff. A lot of nurses were being told, you mustn't have water, you mustn't drink on duty, all this nonsense. And I thought of our Deepa Santosh, who did that big project in trying to raise awareness and make sure that us as student midwives and midwives should make sure they're hydrated. Really important. And I will say, carry on keeping hydrated. And also a big thank you, because it must have been really difficult if you were working yesterday or Monday, because it was so hot. Just sitting around was difficult, but working was especially difficult. So a big thank you to all of the midwives, student midwives, maternity care support workers, everyone in the NHS who just kept going in spite of it being so hot, making sure everyone was looked after. Fantastic. And we know that COVID's still around, so some of our colleagues are off sick. So a big get well soon to anyone who's got COVID, because it's horrible. Some people say it's like a little cold. I don't think so. It has lots of nasty things, and we want everyone to get well and up to full strength again. So look after yourselves, as I always say to you. Now, this week news. Okay, so big news has been a heat wave. Of course, it's across Europe. It's not just us. And we've had these horrible fires. And again, good wishes to anyone who's been involved in any of that. And I hope, well, it sort of teaches you the really important things, because the people who were being interviewed, after they'd lost everything, what was important for them was they had themselves, they had their families, their pets, whatever. That's what's important in this world, isn't it? Actually, a little bit of frivolity now. Guess what? It's National Ice Cream Month. Perfect for this hot weather. Okay, that's one thing. It's also South Asian Heritage Month, and there's a whole lot of information on Twitter if anyone follows Twitter, and I should think it would be on Instagram. I'm not an Instagrammer, but have a look if you are, because they're doing a sort of journey of empire, and that would be very interesting to participate in, have a look in, put information in yourselves. Also, it's Birth Trauma Week, and I'm just going to quote Catherine Guttridge, who's a good friend to this whole program, fantastic person, past president of the RCN, and she always advises, and I think this is really important, listen, always listen to women. Hurt women mean hurt mothering. So you may want to access some of the previous clips, and I know Catherine did speak at our last festival in Birmingham, fantastic. So do have a look at that, because that is really very inspiring for anyone. The other bit of news is the Neonatal Care Bill has passed through to Parliament, and once in law, this means that any parent who has to spend more than 7 days in hospital in the first 28 days of their life of their baby will be able to access an additional 12 weeks paid leave, and that's really important to know about, because it's bad enough if you've had to have your baby in SCABU or neonatal unit to worry about parental time and leave and everything. So that's really good. Last week, the Muslim Women's Network UK launched the all-party parliamentary group on Muslim women's health called Invisible, Maternity Experiences of Muslim Women from Racialized Minority Communities, and chaired by Shaista Gohir. Now, I've got it here. It's big, it's quite thick. And I think, having looked at it, it's a really interesting report. I've done a quick scan, but I want to read it really properly. There are about over 1,000 completed surveys, 37 interviews, a mixture of women, Muslim women, including white, black, Asian, Arab, mixed ethnic groups, larger proportion for London, but all over England. Lots of stories and comments, and there were key themes as well as 45 recommendations, which I think it's worth looking at, because some of the things that it points to are familiar to us for any group of women, but especially this group of women. And that was data gap in between the needs, experiences and outcomes of minority ethnic groups. Invisible because of the data collection way. So maybe the way we're asking questions or recording answers. Women felt invisible during the antenatal and postnatal periods, and their information needs were unmet. And the places they went for information were not necessarily the ones you'd expect. They weren't necessarily coming to us for information because we weren't always able to give that information. Women felt not listened to, even if they had symptoms. They felt neglected, left long periods, not always offered treatment for symptoms, and they felt the care lacked dignity and respect, with some microaggression, which we've heard before with other projects of this way. And they didn't necessarily get access to complaint system. So I'm going to try and get someone to speak in the next series to this, because I think it'll come alive a little bit more than me just repeating some of the key things, but it's worth reading. It's got all these little sort of examples of what women actually say. And I always find in a piece of research that's really interesting. It's not just numbers, it's about women's experiences and how they felt and what they heard, as well as what they said. So really good. Also in the news, I'm sure a lot of you are probably feeling a bit fed up. There has been a pay rise, or there will be a pay rise for midwives. And it seems as though it's around £1,400, which varies from 1.3% to 7%, depending on their band. But it's in effect a kind of, it's not keeping up with inflation. And for those of you who read Roy Lilly's blogs, he does the arithmetic to make it very clear why it's not keeping up with inflation. So useful to look at that. And I know there's going to be more about that in the future. Anyway, that's the news flash now. And I'm galloping on because I don't want to miss a moment of our two lovely speakers. And we're looking at really cutting edge research work. And I love this when this is work in progress. It's coming out soon, but this is hot off the press. And it's looking at the influences of power and hierarchy on staff safety and well-being. The underpinning problems of psychological vulnerability, creating cultural challenges to staff safety, and poor working conditions, creating workplace adversity. And I think this is really important. Midwives do, and students experience this, and it's important for us to know about it. So first of all, I'm really delighted to introduce Charlotte Phillips, who's with us this evening. She's a registered midwife and senior lecturer in safety science. Safety science, wonderful. At Staffordshire University. She has huge experience in clinical academic spheres, and she's currently engaged in a part-time PhD. And let me tell you, that is hard work being part-time and a PhD at all. She's taking a human factors approach, and she's going to explain that, I know, to the investigation of intraprofessional working between registered midwives and maternity support workers, undertaking formal training programs. And on a lighter note, and all this CV is online, you can see that, she's also married to a musician, occasionally joins in to make some noise as part of a local big band. She's a mum to two small yet ever hungry boys, and a fur mum to a cantankerous cat affectionately named Six Dinner Sid. I can't believe why that would be. I think we'll see what Charlotte says anyway. So welcome, Charlotte. The screen is now yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your lovely introduction. I'll just load my slides up for you. There we are. There we go. You'll just kindly bear with me just a moment, and then I might ask you. Okay, lovely. Thank you. Fabulous. So thank you for inviting me to speak to you about my research. And as Sue said, this is ongoing research, so very much kind of in its ever-growing, changing phases at the moment. And I am taking a human factors lens to an exploration of how midwives and maternity support workers who are on training programs work together and experience their work together. So I'll pull these themes around power hierarchy and staff safety through, and Helen and I very serendipitously, if that's the right word, met next to each other at one of the Midwifery Maternity Festival conferences, and beautifully found that our work links very much so. So we'll make some links between those two. Okay, so if I just tell you about my interest, my research at the moment. So we know that lots of different factors within the literature show us impact upon the ways that people in the workforce work together. We also know that lots of different factors affect the quality and safety of the care that we provide. And it's very difficult for us to pin down that one thing causes one effect, which is where human factors can help us to grow in our understanding. In terms of my project, we know a lot, or there is a lot of research in secondary care and in interdisciplinary collaboration. So the ways in which doctors and nurses work together, for example, in tertiary units. We really don't know a lot about how our maternity disciplines work together within their discipline. So how midwives particularly collaborate with support workers, essentially maternity support workers. We don't know a lot about UK settings, certainly within the literature. And I'll bring your attention to a couple of pieces that do tell us a little. But what I am proposing through my research is that we need to upskill this body of the workforce. We know that maternity needs are increasing. We know that our workforce strategies need to grow and enhance with that. And as our profession as midwives moves forward, we need to ensure that the service we provide is safe. And that the understanding of how we work together in these professions, of lots of different contextual factors that affect interdisciplinary working. If we understand those better, we can design systems in a safer, more effective and efficient way. So that is the aim of my projects. Very quickly, because I'm aware this is the fastest hour, a very quick introduction, because I'm very passionate, as I know Helen is as well. Human factors is a very commonly misunderstood and misinterpreted field. We often interpret it as factors of the human, and whilst that is part of human factors itself is a scientific discipline. So it applies theories, principles, data to the design, and it is focused very much, it's a design principle on the design of systems. It has two joint aims, and that is to optimize human well-being and system performance. Safety science tells us these two things are intrinsically interlinked. So our staff safety impacts upon our patient safety, and the reverse is true also. Our aim within human factors and ergonomics as a design principle is to improve the fit between people and their working environment. So whilst we might do interdisciplinary training, we might do training around communication, for example. These are all parts of it, but human factors itself is around improving the fit by design. And systems thinking is part of human factors. This forms the lens of the research that I am hoping to, or performing. So the way in which we think in a systems view is very holistic. We see the system as a whole. We're moving away from linear thinking, away from root cause analysis, away from sort of simple cause and effect, and seeing the systems as a whole. It is a holistic viewpoint. It's a way of the worldview, essentially. It is non-linear. We consider the ripple effects. If something is happening over here, if we make a change in the wider parts of the system, how does that filter down? And I'll show you some models in just a moment. And what we know is that healthcare is the most complex socio-technical system in existence. And what I mean by socio-technical is that humans interact with technologies. And with so many interactions, so many moving parts, more so than in manufacturing, engineering, even in rail and aviation, with all of those different interactions between the parts of the system, outcomes are very, very difficult to predict. But safety science tells us that safety is a factor that emerges from the ways in which those interactions occur in a system. So essentially, if you boil all the parts up and all those chemical reactions occur, safety is something that is a product of the way that a system develops. So is a risk, so is resilience. All of these things are system properties. I want to show you these because I think it links with our power hierarchy and staff safety. These are two human factors models. The one on the left of the screen forms the lens for me for my research. I'll tell you a little bit more in a moment. The one on the right is a systems engineering initiative for patient safety. And on the right-hand side, you'll see it examines the system, the processes within the system, and we see those joint outcomes just where the big red arrow is that I've pointed on the screen. And I'm so sorry they're so small. But essentially, this recognises that patient outcomes and employee and organisational outcomes are intrinsically linked. They are both factors of how the system works together. We cannot see one without the other. We need to look at our staff safety in order to manage our patient safety. And methods, things like the SEEPS model helps us to do this. So this is the background to my study. I know the slides will be disseminated and I'm wary of time, so I'll just skim through this. I'm looking at the ways in which we train maternity support workers. So actually, we've not had maternity support workers in maternity services for a very long time, as they are now. It's from a 2004 report, where we started to integrate the role of the maternity support worker as opposed to the auxiliary nurse. It's quite a rapid development, really, of the role. And there's been a very, very limited learning offer to date. We see this rapid acceleration through 2016 and Better Birth, looking at the ways in which maternity support workers can help us to meet the aims of Better Birth's continuity, for example. And the Secretary of State for Health, which was Jeremy Hunt at the time, put forward an aim to professionalise the role of the MSW and to create an educational framework. We see that embodied in the workforce strategy. And as I said before, we don't have a lot of underpinning evidence to suggest to design these programmes based upon what we know about how these two parts of the workforce work together. But what we do know in the small amount of literature that there is, although it doesn't look small on this page, is that historically we have a lot of workforce tensions. There is issues around boundary keeping. Billy Hunter's work talks a lot around kind of the sociology and things around the ways in which we practice as midwives. There are themes around trust, respect, accountability. Our pins are accountability in terms of our professional, the ways in which we delegate tasks, for example, who retains accountability. But we do know within the literature that MSWs are deemed a positive and highly motivated group, but we do see issues with boundaries and differences in the ways that those two parts of the professions work together. What I've got here is my the lens or the framework which has formed part of the narrative review that I've undertaken as part of my research. And here I've used the elements of the system to frame the elements of the research, and we can start to see the gaps actually here. We can see that there are gaps in how interdisciplinary working is explored in how we use tools, tasks and equipment, for example. And Helen's work beautifully starts to fill those gaps, but that's been a huge thing that's come from me. We also know that the roles of MSWs hugely involve using tasks, tools and equipment and feeding those back through communication, accountability, delegation, back to maternity support workers. And again, I come back to, if we investigate this further, we can design these systems better. These are some key themes that have come through for me looking at the literature. There are not many pieces of empirical literature, but there is a big scoping review done by Griffin et al. And also a Swedish study that examined interprofessional working on a delivery unit. And there are some quotes here that I've pulled. We see issues around workforce design. I don't think that will come as a surprise to anybody. But we see here workload pressures mean that development's very frequently reactive. Human factors can help us here. Design principles can help us here. We definitely see this variation in the learning offer, and I'm hoping that through the research that I and my university will perform, that we'll start to understand how these have been implemented. But we see a real want and need from maternity support workers to access educational opportunities. We do see issues around intraprofessional relationships. We see a few quotes on the page there, just on the second column. There's a nervousness about giving support workers greater autonomy. We don't know why in the literature as yet. There's a sense here they almost have to prove themselves. And if we consider the impact of that upon the individual, how the safety of that individual is affected, and thus the safety of the service that they are able to give. We see quotes around no one has the conviction to make the role work. There is a lack of groupthink, thinking outside of the box, and that the service doesn't always see the maternity support worker as a valuable asset, and thus the role is not always valued either. However, we see theme coming through around lack of understanding of what the role is and what maternity support workers do. And so there's a gap here between an assumption and an understanding that we can start to work within. But this gap, this boundary, has implications for staff safety and thus patient safety. And there are issues coming through the literature around role boundaries, essentially, that are very similar to historical work that has been done. So we can see some concern around roles, losing midwifery posts. Midwifery is a veiled profession, so others seeing it through a veil that filters certain elements of practice. And you can see in the quote just at the bottom, if we perceive, or if individuals perceive midwifery through a veil that only permits certain images through, that evokes feelings of exclusion, frustration, and loss of control. Social exclusion and loss of control are perceived by our brains in the same way as pain. And so we can see there staff safety is hugely impacted by these experiences. It is most important that we look at the ways in which we cross these system boundaries. The gaps between professions give us a huge opportunity to improve staff and patient safety. And the bits upon this screen that will be disseminated are an example from the Stafford report, where there was very much a gap in the system boundary communication across them. And it matters because if we design work systems intelligently, we can help to manage issues such as power, hierarchy, and incivility. Incivility in the literature is a huge patient safety issue as well as a staff safety issue. We see incidences, particularly in operating theatres, and patient outcomes very negatively affected by incivility. And there's a fabulous website, Sue, that maybe we can disseminate called Civility Saves Lives, which has really brilliant links to literature available on the importance of civility within the system. If we start to look at linear thinking, root cause analysis, for example, we lose sight of things like civility, and yet they have massively intrinsic properties in terms of system safety. This is my final slide before I pass you over to Helen. We know that we have issues in staffing. We know that we have issues in our workforce. These have been magnified through the pandemic. And we know that our future workforce looks a little bleak at the moment, although I'm ever hopeful that we can overcome these issues. we have an issue around how we see resilience for me, and this comes through in the literature, hugely in the literature. There is a rhetoric that's fueled, I feel, by individual resilience training. Resilience is a system property. It emerges as a result of different interactions within the system. When we treat error issues, harm issues, staff resilient issues individually, we're missing the ways that we can design the system to be resilient in itself, to remove those barriers that cause stress, that cause harm to staff. If we remove those barriers by design, we start to see, as the quote says at the bottom, we start to see resilience as a quality and safety issue, as opposed to an issue of individual coping, essentially. That is a much safer system to work in for staff, and ultimately connected outcomes for patients. I'm going to leave you with this slide. This is a safety culture discussion card that again is disseminated through the links. These are a set of safety culture cards that have been developed by Professor Paul Barry and his team in NHS Scotland. They are free to access, and they are methods of opening safety culture conversations in your organisations. They are available and free to use on the link on the screen there. They are questions that we can ask of our teams, of our management structures, of each other, of ourselves, and they're ways to support systems thinking. And just linking in with my research here, we can feel these tensions, we can feel these barriers, notice them. They are quality and safety issues. Use the crux here as a questioning tool to see if we ourselves can better our systems. I'm going to just skip over that, because essentially we are all part of the system. If we change our mindset, we hold our own individual accountability. We cannot hold the weight of the system. That is very important. But we can do our little tiny bit, even if it's just in the way we speak to somebody else. Consider ourselves as stakeholders and how we can impact design. Consider all of the elements, interactions of what is happening. Is something we feel today happening somewhere over there in the system? Often, the person who notices a problem is the best person to fix it. There are lots of opportunities that come about by distributed leadership, and also by seeing the system around us in a non-linear way, how we can design things better, even if it's in a system where one person is talking to another. Improve our communication, open discussions around things that could be better, and build our safety and learning cultures are the very clear themes that come through just at this early stage of my research. And that is me.
Ah, fantastic, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Get all those references. So Charlotte pointed out very helpfully, all of the slides will be available to you, and some of those references are on the reference list. I didn't put all of them on the list because it's quite a lot. And some of you may not have access as easily, but the safety cards would be a really good tool to use. I mean, it's quite interesting you're talking about problems and people picking up problems. I was thinking as you were talking, well, some of the key people to pick up problems in the system are the students, actually, and patients and clients. They'll often pick up something, and we need to again listen. And not be defensive about it, because sometimes they'll ask a question about, well, why do you do things this way? And you kind of, if you stop and think, you might think, hey, yeah, I wonder why we do things. Because we've always done it, and we do have a tendency to do that. So it was really fascinating, and this is percolating through my brain, because it's like listening to a different language in some ways. And for you two, you're very au fait with it, and I'm sure that the audience are digging into this as well. So just to remind the audience, if you have a question for Charlotte and then for Helen, you need to start putting it in fairly soon, because we do have a very short hour. We've got another 15 minutes yet till the questions come through. So thank you so much, Charlotte. We're going to move on to Helen now. And Helen has been within healthcare in a variety of roles. She's just done about everything. She's been a care assistant, a ward clerk, a nurse, a midwife, and an interim equality lead. She's got diplomas in art education. Now, how handy is that? and nursing, a degree in midwifery, and 2 MScs. That's going over the top, really, Helen. She's also a Prince 2 project management practitioner, and that's quite an achievement too, and holds a lean 6 Sigma green belt. I've got no idea about that, but it sounds very healthy. She's also a part-time midwifery and nursing lecturer teaching at the University of Leicester. She's coming into her 3rd year as a full-time interdisciplinary business and social sciences PhD fellow studying at the University of Leicester, is a member of the Sapphire Research Group, and is the first midwife to be sponsored by the Healthcare Improvement Studies Institute. Well done you. She's also a mum to 2 teenage daughters and wife to a budding part-time ska punk musician. This is 2 musicians here. And a full-time software architect living in the South Northants, growing their own fruit and veg, which she shared with us earlier, and crushing their own homebrew. I don't think we'll have time for that. I think we'll have to invite both of these guests in again, because I think they've got quite a few stories to tell. But Helen, welcome, and the screen is now yours.
Thank you. Now then, let's hope that I've got the right one. What can you see? Right, so we're going to stop sharing. I apologise. We practiced this earlier and it worked beautifully, didn't it?
This is both Helen and Charlotte are doing very fancy presentations, as you'll all see. They just take a little time to get perfect.
Here we go. I just clicked on the wrong one. I'm so sorry. Does that look?
Not a problem. Not a problem.
That one looks more hopeful, doesn't it? Are we good? And
looks pretty good.
I can, and then I'm just going to move all our pictures out the way. Okay, right, I'm with you. Thank you so much for that, Charlotte. I'm really glad you went first, because you've set me up beautifully. You've explained so much that I now don't need to explain. Okay, so my second MSc was actually part of my PhD fellowship, and it was in quality and safety in healthcare. And I've managed to publish an awful lot from that MSc, so I'm really glad I did it. And I'm the only fellow in my cohort that actually took on that MSc. So everyone else is kind of finalising now, and I've got another year to go. But I'm so glad I did, because it's pushed me in the direction that I now need to go in for the rest of my career. So I'm going to present to you the work that underpins my PhD, and this is the dissertation work from my MSc in quality and safety in healthcare. These are 2 of the papers that I had published from this work. There are more, but I decided not to show off too much. Cue really busy slide. This is a little bit of a worrying slide, but I'll give you the context for it. So because my clinical background is maternity services, I developed this timeline of key moments in English maternity services healthcare safety history, really since 1993, which was the year that Changing Childbirth was published. And coincidentally, that's actually the year that I commenced my nurse training with Project 2000. And we can see that this illustrates a plethora of policy interventions for service improvements, really since 2017, where I've had to expand my timeline. And that's in the aftermath of revelations from the Francis report, the Freedom to Speak Up report, the Kirkup report. Then we've got Cumberledge, and we end up with the Ockenden report. We know the history. So my timeline demonstrates the current focus on quality and safety within maternity services in England, and it evidences the timeliness of my research. So from 2017, the UK government intervened, removing midwifery self-regulation in response to the Kirkup report, which was Morecambe Bay, as we all know, and again intervening in September 2020 with the opening of a public inquiry into maternity services safety. And this has culminated in significant funding pledges for maternity services and the acknowledgement of a need to improve leadership. Incidentally, Buchan estimates a global shortage of almost 6 million nurses, and the International Confederation of Midwives estimates a shortage of 900,000 midwives globally. And within England, we've got estimates between 2,500 and 3,000 midwives necessary just to run a safe service. So we need to create a system in which quality and safety aren't sacrificed. And I firmly believe that the people closest to that system are the ones best placed to improve it, which echoes what Charlotte was saying earlier. So Deming said that a system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. There is a reason why 70% of claims against the NHS resolution are coming from maternity services, alongside 47% of payouts, and that will probably be more now thanks to the Ockenden report. So we're experiencing horrifying attrition rates for maternity professions. The staff experience and the patient experience are intrinsically linked. So within the work that I'm about to show you, power is defined as the ability to control people and events, and hierarchy is described as a system in which people or things are arranged according to their importance. This work was carried out during the summer of 2020 when we had restrictions on research ethics for MSc students. So I had to do a narrative synthesis rather than primary research. And I pulled together 10 research papers over the previous 20 years with the views of 173 maternity staff. Participants ranged from midwives, maternity support workers, and student midwives, and came from countries including the countries of the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. And each of the papers that I reviewed considered a strong need for improved education on the topic of staff well-being and a recognition of the urgent need to challenge a culture which so directly affects the safety within healthcare. So some of you will recognize this is the double helix DNA, and these were the themes that I pulled out from this particular narrative synthesis. And the worry is this the DNA of maternity services? I'm going to share some of my findings in context, and then we will flip the idea of this being the DNA of our service right on its head. Exploration of dangerous workloads. I love being a midwife, but I'm exhausted, and what we do is never good enough. Management support is non-existing. We have employed so many junior midwives to replace those who've retired or left the profession burned out. So as an experienced midwife, you are hammered with high-risk patients, expected to support the junior midwives and mentor the students. And then our organisation wonders why we are so exhausted. There is a terrible, deeply ingrained, long-standing culture of bullying based on outdated ideas about hierarchy and bad managers who had no real management training. Women and their families experience bad care from small-minded individuals who bully and are bullied. It's awful. And so I pulled themes about anxiety about the job, fear of investigation, futility of speaking out, feeling powerless, and burnout, stress, and anxiety. I give guest lectures around the country, and I use Participol for online teaching so that students can feel a sense of ownership. And this particular slide is from a cohort of students who were about to qualify. And as you can see, there was an overwhelming agreement that they'd experienced these problems just as they were about to qualify. Student: would I go to matron if I had a problem? She'd be the last person I'd go to, that's for sure. No, I certainly wouldn't go to matron. No, I'd be highlighting myself. I'd probably just be earmarked for something else again. No, I wouldn't. And she would yell at you, publicly humiliate you in front of the whole ward. And when you started crying, she would pull you into hugs and become very emotionally manipulative. So this public humiliation perhaps showed how the power implicit within hierarchy is operationalized. I would be physically sick before entering a placement. And despite constantly reporting to management that our staffing levels are so poor, it is making it an unsafe environment for staff and service users. Nothing is done to help. They will never close the unit despite the safety issues. And when something does happen, it's the midwives who end up being investigated, despite our continual concerns being voiced. And Hunter and Warren wrote of tensions arising from the juxtaposition of professional autonomy with institutional policies and protocols. And this is something that I pick up within my PhD, is the staff experience compared to our policies and to our reports. And this resonates with the sense of powerlessness that participants all felt. It highlights the significance of risk and uncertainty in the nature of midwifery work that we will all recognise. 18% of participants in an RCM Caring for You campaign admitted to crying often at work because of their work-related pressures, and I'm certain because of COVID that figure will be far higher now. And staff spoke of feeling haunted by the longer-term consequences of adverse events and a fear of future litigation if the babies involved had not thrived, and we will all recognise that. I looked at the psychological vulnerability, and this is really cultural normalization of dysfunctional relationships, the stuff that we end up taking for granted, like we just put up with it. So the bullying, the subordination, the rigid organization system, and that workplace atmosphere. So bullying was cited by maternity staff in every single paper research for this narrative, and hierarchical language showed staff fearing that they were little fish about to be fried, or that great fleas have little fleas upon their backs to bite them, and little fleas have lesser fleas, and so ad infinitum. This is hierarchical language coming through. This infers that the act of bullying is a learned behaviour, perhaps in a process of initiation into the profession. She, the mentor, is the bully of the unit, and other staff join in to avoid being the next victim. The abusive use of hierarchical power within dysfunctional relationships was best described in the following quotation. Incompetent senior management, morally questionable leadership, disability discrimination, punitive health and wellbeing policies, knee-jerk reactions to mistakes, lack of information about resolutions, a bullying culture, and a lack of team spirit. I looked at working conditions, that poor organizational structural conditions, so the lack of breaks, the dangerous workloads, and that inflexibility that we are all so familiar with. And again, this was from a cohort of students about to qualify. Look at how many of them had experienced lack of breaks, dangerous workloads, and inflexibility. It's all there. There's quite a delay sometimes in getting help or knowing how to get help. That's been apparent from a few incidents that we've had over the last year. But although we feel that we've got a clear pathway to protect staff and other patients and other users, in reality, it doesn't always work out that way. And it's pretty much at the mercy of whichever security guard is on or whichever manager is covering or whatever. And I definitely re-explore that within my PhD. With the responsibility, lack of support, low pay, and fear of constant litigation, not a chance. Every shift is so dangerously understaffed that midwives will risk their NMC pin just to turn up for work. The caseloads are ridiculous, and never did we get a proper break. So dangerous, and that's a midwife that left. The inflexibility. If a more common sense approach to staffing were taken, there are vast numbers of midwives in exactly the same position, all trying to juggle young families. If only we were allowed to work fewer hours, we'd all stay and staffing would be better. Another midwife that's left. I looked at the institutional normalization of the dysfunctional relationship, so the exhaustion, the low morale, the poor communication, and that poor staff engagement. Several papers pointed out that dysfunctional relationships occurred on labour wards specifically, such that some would avoid returning to that environment because they were expressing deep concern about working there. And this suggests that the abuses of both power and hierarchy are feeding into a system so much so that it's become commonplace institutional behaviour, with staff left unsupported and yet still held accountable, threatening their safety on a professional register. And Linda voiced her belief that midwives are so mean to one another because everyone is absolutely exhausted. And that exhaustion, that time, is a really key component of my PhD. So who is going to get their heads on the chopping block for it, you know? You do know you might have to go to court over it. You might have to go to court, don't you? I was baffled by this change, gone from the sadness then to the fear. It was very surreal. And that was, wow, such a moment for me. And I thought, do I want to be in this profession where clearly this should be all about the parents now and supporting the midwife and the staff who were in there? Worst decision I made was applying for midwifery. I wish I'd looked into this more, but I know that it's not the end of the world and that I was part of something beautiful with those families. And I will forever treasure this, but I can't carry on like this. The disgusting behaviour witnessed and experienced on placement makes me embarrassed to be a part of this profession. Another midwife lost. Poor communication. The matron was there. It's been a bit of a bad night, she said. I've heard all about it and I don't want to hear any more. And I thought, well, you know, that's great. I've heard all about it. I don't want to hear any more. And I said, okay, and sounds upset. Obviously, this midwife I was working with was in floods of tears and I was expected to be okay. And off I went and she went on sick and I never did see her again. Another lost midwife. So the disconfirmation findings are how we know that this bleak picture is not written into the DNA of maternity services. These findings are what give us all hope that the system can change. We can know that there are opportunities for us to thrive as a community of practice. Labour ward is fabulous since the new superintendent came. She's excellent. She's just uplifted the place. She is just such a bonus around the place. She's somebody that you can go to and talk to and say, look, this happened and that happened, and she'll actually sort it out. Another band 7 came out and she took me into the clinical room and she shut the door and she gave me a hug. And this wasn't your most touchy-feely band 7 generally. And she said, if my daughter was going to deliver here, I would be so happy if you were looking after her. And that kind of, well, it made all the difference. I was very inexperienced and obviously quite distressed, and that made a huge difference. And I felt it gave me the puff of wind I needed to go back in and carry on with my responsibilities. And kindness. After the neonatal death I was involved in, we had the police in, statements and God knows what. Your whole practice is questioned, and it was an awful thing. There was no mechanism for debriefing, just waiting for the postmortems, which took about 3 weeks. And that was an awful, awful, awful thing. And one of the obstetricians got me through. He said that in this profession, not everyone is going to make it, and none of us are God. I want to become a team leader so I can become in charge and make sure that new students aren't treated in the same way. So I looked at the NHS Constitution and compared this to all of these experiences. We have a right to a working environment with flexible working opportunities. We have a right to a working environment that is healthy and safe and free from harassment, bullying, and violence. We have a right to be treated fairly, equally, and free from discrimination. There is a pledge to provide a positive working environment, promoting supportive, open cultures that help staff to do their jobs, to do the best to their ability, to raise concerns with employers, whether it's about safety, malpractice, or other risks in the public interest. And gaslighting. This is the action of tricking or controlling someone by making them believe that things aren't true. And gaslighting is actually a form of psychological abuse. So the implications for healthcare, by addressing the negative elements of power and hierarchy within maternity services, by providing an environment where staff are personally safe to voice their concerns without dysfunctional professional and personal redress, and a leadership acknowledgement of our human fallibility rather than complacency, blame, and misplaced brand loyalty, we may be able to mitigate for the inherent risks which lead to harm for both patients and staff within our healthcare services. And I have to mention my funders, the Healthcare Improvement Studies Institute, because they created 7 features of safety in maternity units. And this is brilliant because it's everything that we need to make the systems work. It's about commitment to safety with all levels of staff involved. It's about technical competence and training, and the lack of training is really coming through in my PhD research. Teamwork and cooperation, positive working relationships, constant reinforcing of safe, ethical, and respectful behaviours, which is what Charlotte was talking about, multiple problem-solving sensing systems, systems and processes designed for safety and regularly reviewed and optimised, and that is my PhD, and effective coordination and the ability to mobilise quickly. So when Charlotte and I met at the conference earlier this year with our adjacent PhD posters, we realised that we had so much in common. There are strong grounds for collaboration. My PhD takes this original narrative synthesis a step further by exploring employee voice in experiences of asking for help. A PhD needs to be unique, and mine is interdisciplinary. I take business and social science ideas, and I'm reviewing staff narratives of escalating care, researching the staff experience of navigating the digitisation of escalation visual management tools, so like early warning scores, sepsis, and SBARs. This has been a brilliant way to explore further the working culture of maternity services across England. James Reason said, "We cannot change the human condition, but we can change the conditions under which humans work." And Don Abedian said that we need to consider systems, processes, and outcomes. So I've been taking a look at real staff voices. I've been lucky enough to interview my people, successfully recruited through social media. I've interviewed 55 members of staff from across England, and these have been broadly representative of the multidisciplinary team. It's clear from my research that different staff groups have very definite visual needs for the future of digitisation. For doctors, these needs are very much rooted in, just tell me what you need from me. Managers want tools to tell me what you did, where, when, and how, and their world is one invaded by audits and reputations. Senior staff have said, trust my judgment, I'm always accountable, but I have limited time to care. And this staff group are being squeezed in every direction and crushed under the weight of duplication. Junior staff have very clearly said, teach me, guide me, support me, I'm frightened. And this staff group are responsible for taking the patient observations underpinning escalation, but they do not necessarily have the training or the knowledge to support the roles that they hold. So my coding has grouped these findings into human factors, of comprehension and motivation, and the intangible and tangibles of ergonomics. There isn't time within this presentation to fully explain my findings, but this slide displays a summary of my priori conceptual model to be applied to my own empirical research findings within my PhD. And this is what I plan to present to you when we go back to Birmingham next year. So here are my contact details, which will be available on the slides. And I give you an awful lot of references because anyone that works with me knows. All of my colleagues are going to be saying, oh God, it's Helen. This is what I do, is I share my references. All right. Thank you so much.
I love this because this is a kind of typical, because once you've been in midwifery for a while and you've done some academic work,
oh, I know,
you get favorite books and favorite articles, and if someone says to you which is your favorite, you just can't choose, so you get everything. So well done, and thank you so much, Helen.
You're welcome.
And can you imagine these two at the conference in Birmingham chatting and talking and sharing? And again, it was like a different language because they're looking at something in a different way. It's really exciting, and I think it's important for it to be exciting because there's potentially some really sad and kind of uncomfortable stuff, the things around bullying and kind of exclusion and nastiness. We don't like, when it's talked, I don't want to be associated with that really. I want us to be different. And you can imagine people being bullied, having been bullied themselves because they kind of think that's the way you carry on, or they just don't see it. And this is again for other people to kind of highlight. But then if they wouldn't dare say to anybody, you're in a terrible trap, aren't you? Yeah. So I'm sure with both of your research, there's going to be some tools for us in midwifery, which is absolutely fantastic. And I'm going to look forward. You've already got a forewarning, or a not forewarning, that sounds negative.
I'm coming.
Planning of next year's Birmingham festival, where these two I think might be doing some sort of symposium. We haven't quite worked it out yet, but it's going to be exciting. So put it in your diaries. I've got the date somewhere. Let me see. In Birmingham, maybe it's the 16th of May. So if this is your area, stand by. Now
we'll be there.
We've got some questions. I'm looking away. I have to tell the audience this, to my other screen. One of my guests here has got 3 screens and I'm a bit envious, but I've got 2, and here they come. We've got some comments. A comment from Emily. Hi, Emily, who says, from a personal perspective, I do not think I could do my job at all without the amazing MSWs that support us every single shift at UHNM. They're invaluable. So well done there. Thank you, Emily. And Diane Ridout, Diane, thank you. Hello, Diane, says, the MSWs I work with bind the team. They are fantastic and sadly often forgotten, and we need to remember that. So we need to hang on to that. Okay, we've got a question from Hannah Wilderspin, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Hi, Hannah. And she says, I'm wondering how non-clinical staff could help with the culture you're discussing. I work for the Maternity Voices Partnership, and we are keen to do what we can. I might throw that to Helen first. I'm sure Charlotte might have a view on that, but yeah, as it was.
Yeah. I think we've both got views on that. Do you know, I really think it's about giving employee voice a safe space to talk. And for a lot of staff, they don't feel safe at work to talk. So it's providing a safe space for that staff narrative. I mean, that's kind of the point of my PhD. And the maternity support voices, the student voices have been really strong within my PhD. Right. So it's listening. Yeah.
And would that be something a non-clinical, say for example, the Maternity Voices Partnership colleagues?
Yeah.
Would people be happy with that sort of approach?
I think it would go down a storm. I mean, I can't speak for the nation clearly, but I mean, I've genuinely had people I've interviewed 55 members of staff, and I've genuinely had people thanking me for listening, and that's bowled me over because I didn't think that would happen. I really didn't anticipate that, and that's what's genuinely happened.
Fabulous. Yeah. Okay, Charlotte, did you want to?
Absolutely. I mean, my brain goes straight into system design with this. And I think the Maternity Voices Partnership particularly has huge access to clinical, non-clinical, and our stakeholder group, the women and families who use the service. Understanding the people who use the service, their needs, their experiences, beautiful, lovely, but not very useful if we don't do anything with that information. Similarly, we design the system, but we don't take into account what anybody needs within the system, then that's not very useful either. And I think organisations like Maternity Voice Partnerships are absolutely the bridge between those two things. They are key stakeholder groups. We need to flatten hierarchies to make sure that those voices are given equally loud and important. Kudos within the system. Definitely.
It's sort of highlighting to me as you're talking, I'm thinking that, we've got these hospitals that were designed to look after people, but actually it's the wrong way round. Because we've got focused so much on looking after the hospital, we've kind of forgotten who's coming into the hospital for whatever they're coming into for. So this is systems thinking, folks.
And our staff are our service users too.
Absolutely.
We're all born, we're all ill sometimes. We are one and the same.
Fabulous. And thank you, Hannah, for that. It was a really good question to ask. Okay, I've got another comment from Claire Dale. And Claire's a regular with us. Hi, Claire. And she says, if there was an option of a part-time midwifery degree, I'd have started my journey many years ago. There's no denying it's a tough course, especially when you have a young family. The midwifery support workers are amazing where I work and a source of support and advice. Big votes coming from the MSWs, so good on you. And there's another comment from Amanda Taylor, who says, the midwifery support workers I work with are excellent and do a great job. Thank you, Amanda. That's great. So if you're an MSW, you should be sitting out there with a glow of love, because that's all that seems to be coming from colleagues this evening. Okay, and then another comment from Claire Dale. Upskilling MSWs further and adding to their numbers would go a long way to improving patient care and experience, in my opinion. It may be a more flexible option for those unable to do the degree, but are passionate about working in maternity services. That's a good point. Thank you, Claire. And there's a question from Emily. I recall when starting my midwifery training, there being a massively hostile working environment, particularly on labour ward. But since qualifying, a lot of the old school band 7s retiring, I've found coming to work being really supportive and pleasant environment. Do you think the situation has improved after the last 10 years or so? And I'll start with Charlotte this time, to be fair.
I think that you would probably find if you did a 12 steps into every maternity unit in the country, there would probably be vast differences within those. And I think maybe standardising some of the ways in which we measure those experiences would help us to know whether things are improving on the whole or not. It's very, very difficult to say. I think it's nice to hear, and I think with measures like our AEQIP and our restorative clinical supervision and the investment that is currently being made into measures like that, I would hope that we'll continue to see those improvements. But that's lovely to hear, really good to hear.
Well, because there may be other things going on in that vicinity, like more education opportunities and more restorative everything. Anyway,
how we share that good practice.
Yay, absolutely. How about Helen? Would you say it's improved in the last 10 years?
Well, if I think about the interviews that I've carried out for my PhD, what I've noticed is there's a real discrepancy across England. I've got a map that shows where I've anonymized everyone, but just like the first 3 digits of the postcodes. And I've interviewed staff in London that are being paid as a band 4 as a support worker because they just won't stay. They can't recruit and hold on and retain people. And then in other parts of the country, there are staff being paid as band 2s who are doing maternal and neonatal obs. There's no linear. It's a very strange system that we've got going on with our maternity support workers. And actually, it's really opened my eyes as an experienced midwife to the plight of support workers at the moment, because there isn't any fairness. I mean, I interviewed a really gorgeous and very enlightened head of midwifery who could see no problem with maternity support workers on a band 2 doing maternal obs. And I'm thinking, but they don't necessarily have robust training to underpin what they're actually doing. And then it's transpired that they're the ones that are starting the escalation process. And because there are so few midwives around, I've got some really heartbreaking interviews with support workers clearly describing where they're repeating the obs and they're repeating the obs again, and they know it needs escalating, but there's no one to turn to the point where they're ending up contacting paediatricians and obstetricians, totally bypassing, but on a band 2. And think about that vulnerability that they're carrying with them.
Absolutely.
It's a very strange thing that's come out of my PhD that I hadn't anticipated would come out of it. Yeah.
Very interesting. Charlotte?
I was just going to jump in and say one of the themes that has come through for me is around fairness, and exactly what Helen's just said there around the discrepancy. But fairness leads to dissatisfaction, job dissatisfaction, frustration, then perceived as lack of resilience, but it isn't, can lead to burnout. It becomes a safety issue. So we need to see these things as key issues.
Great, thank you. Well, that was a good point, Emily. Thank you for that. And we've got another comment from Jane Marshall. Hi, Jane. Who says, as MSWs are not regulated, the person delegating work to them, usually the midwife, holds the accountability. That's why awareness of boundaries and appropriate training for their role is key. And that's absolutely so. And I think that's one of the things that happened initially, is people were worried about boundaries, and the midwife and the MSW knowing their boundaries is a lot better. But of course, what Charlotte's just described is kind of, the boundaries aren't right, because MSW shouldn't be carrying that level of accountability with nobody to refer to.
Huge discrepancies nationally.
Absolutely.
In job descriptions too, so the protections on both sides. Huge.
Absolutely. Good point. Okay, and then Diane Rideout again says, I agree, 12-hour shifts have removed the handover when we chatted, reflected and learned. Do you think that has an impact? That's a really nice point, Diane. That used to be a time when you could have a real teaching over things. So I'm showing my age now, because I think they've gone. What do you think? Should we try Helen first?
Definitely. That's definitely come out in my research. This is the thing, though. You run an interview for an hour and I'm talking about escalation tools and digitization and visual management, but it's all the other cultural stuff that comes out with it that just naturally comes from the conversation. And that's a sign of a really good interview, because it just naturally flows, and I don't have to worry so much about my prompts, because they're just telling me everything I need. But that is so clear within my research, and especially something that's happened, which I will talk a lot more about at Easter, is with the digitization of SBARs and SBARs being pinged across. So then a mother and her baby will be taken to the next ward area, but there'll be no verbal handover. There'll be no sitting down with a cup of tea and having a chat and just a debrief with your colleague. It just, in some areas of people that I've interviewed, it just doesn't happen anymore. It's just an electronic SBAR. And then the mother just gets abandoned.
Gosh,
which is and
everything that women say about postnatal care, that's illustrated, isn't it? And I'm thinking of the midwives, because I was thinking the handover period as being a time where you actually did stop, look at the woman, have a chat, tell her where everything was, but also the handover, the sitting round, having a handover, proper handover twice a day, also as a time to get off your feet, but also time to reflect and work together as a team. Lost. Did you want to say something? Sorry, Charlotte.
I was just going to say, there's it's an educational quote, a big quote around there's a difference between 10 years experience and 1 year repeated 10 times, and the difference is reflection. And so I think absolutely those key small corridor moments for reflection are really important for the development of our practice. So maybe we need to seek them out in different ways, different systems.
Maybe it's been a case of throwing too many babies out with bathwater. Still. And Carmel Bradshaw, hi Carmel, says, thank you, Charlotte and Helen. Have fascinating work and great to look at what we can do differently to stop this endless cycle of toxic culture. So thank you for that. Jenny Hall, hi Jenny. Supervisor midwives used to have listing and supportive role. Are PMAs not picking this up in their role?
If I could jump in there, there's been an acknowledgement, hasn't there, as we haven't got enough PMAs. We've been very hit by the pandemic, by difficulties implementing the role, I've just done some work around scoping some literature around PMA and embedding in practice, and there are again some boundaries drawn between what the old SOM role was versus what the PMA is. There's some understanding issues there too. So I am very positive about what we're doing in terms of training numbers of PMAs at the moment, and hopefully we can we can move forward with that in the future. But again, huge themes through the existing body of work at the moment: time, resource, and feeling confident to take those times out to discuss and reflect.
And it's just talking about time. I'm very conscious of the time myself. Now, we've had lots of comments from Natalie. I'm a student midwife. I find it hard to report unfair behaviour, as in a couple of years, these midwives will be my colleagues. And that's a comment rather than a question. And then Melissa, who's saying, I'm nearing the end of my PhD and agree that the healthcare professionals I've interviewed thank me for recognising there is a problem and for interviewing. They urge me to make positive changes within my PhD results. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Melissa. And Kim Watt says, hi, Kim. The issue that Helen is describing is not unique for MSWs. There's a north-south divide with midwifery pay structures as well. We better not get into that because this could be massive. And we will explore this, though. I think the points that you make, we do take on board for the future sessions. And then let me see. We've got one. I think we can do. Let me see. One. No, there's another comment. Let's have it. Juliet Samuel from Essex. Hi, Juliet. Says, how do you think that MSWs can be protected in this environment of shortages of midwives, which might lead to knee-jerk escalation of role responsibility? Should we start with Charlotte?
That is one of the key questions of my research.
Excellent.
Is we don't know, because we don't have the underpinning knowledge and understanding. We do have the key things that safety science tells us will improve systems, and that is ongoing monitoring with the correct tools, redesign with stakeholder involvement, and getting the views and understanding of these particular relationships and experiences. So I'm hoping in a very small way that what I'm trying to do will help to make that environment safer for all. But the key element is we don't know right now. Well, I certainly don't.
You might know. And how about Helen? Did you want to add anything? No. I think this has been so exciting, and I just want to reassure our audience, and thank you for some fantastic comments and lovely questions that really made this hour has gone even faster than ever. But we will be inviting Helen and Charlotte back for the Birmingham Festival, so keep abreast of that, remembering that you can come face to face at our festivals, but also everything's recorded, so you can access it if you have to be working. So, be assured of that. And thank you so much to Helen and Charlotte for joining us. It's been fantastic, very exciting, a little bit depressing in times, but not in a way, because we know a lot of this stuff, but we also know that we're now going to get evidence to be able to change things that make it even better. So thank you so much. Now, I have to just now come to an end and say a big thank you to Helen and Charlotte, and also to our editor and our producer, Amy Cliff Aribo, Paul Rushworth, who manages all the questions coming through to me, and also Deborah for sending out information to everybody. Just reminding you that information is going to be, or the resources will be available on the website and on Facebook on Friday, and of course you'll have access to a nice little podcast, so if you wanted to have more and listen to it again and kind of really chew over the issues, that'll be available to you. Now, next week there's no maternity and midwifery hour. We're having a little holiday, but we will be back on September the 7th, I believe. But in the meantime, don't forget to book for the Wales and South West Festival. Remember, face-to-face, or it's recorded, and that's on the 13th of September. You could also pre-plan. Let me see. I have to look at my other. This isn't another screen. This is just a bit of paper on my wall. On the 29th of November in Edinburgh for the Scottish Festival. Again, everything's recorded, and we've got a fantastic lineup for that. But in the meantime, thank you to all of you for participating, coming with us. Really enjoyed this series. It's been really interesting from my point of view, and I hope from your point of view, and we'll look forward to seeing you for episode 1, series 8. And in the meantime, just take care of yourselves and your own loved ones, and we'll see you soon. Bye.